One thing I've always, or it's always said and always will maintain, that any attempt to rejoin the EU, or to at least, shall we say, lessen the damage of Brexit and makes this Brexit a lot more softer and end us eventually on the path to rejoining, is to go and sign, you know, agreements, agree to following the same EU rules and regulations for bio, bio products like food, agri-foods, plant products. These deals can be done very, very easily. It's just okay if the EU, you know, does this standard, we'll sign the same thing and match it as well. We'll keep in lockstep. It would not be that hard to do for the UK to agree to that with Europe. I mean, we've practically agreed it already in principle with the level playing field agreement. So it would not be that hard to do. And then, as we've always said, eventually you'll end up with, well, why aren't we in the single market and customs union? And then once you're in there, why aren't we in, full members of the EU to have a seat at the table? It's the basic path back that we have been saying since day one. Why? Because you cannot escape the reality that the EU is a bigger not only economy, it is a bigger political power, it has a lot more clout, it is a regulatory superpower. If, British companies want to continue to sell their goods into Europe, they have to follow European rules and regulations. It's that simple. And yet, this, I think, is going to be now the defining battle that we see happen in the Conservative Party. Which direction do the Conservatives really want to take? Do they actually seriously want to go down this route of, we're just going to completely ignore Europe to one side? As far as we're concerned, Europe doesn't matter, Europe doesn't exist. And of course, we've had that now for a number of years. And of course, what has happened? We have seen very, very much slowly our economy disintegrating, supply lines affected. We've been left out of the cold in a very couple of very key meetings, certainly between America and Europe, because obviously we're not part of the EU anymore. And it just goes to show you that when America comes to Europe, they don't go to the UK anymore, they go to the EU. So eventually there was always going to be this recognition by groups of Conservatives that we would have to do deals, do these bilateral trade deals, or not only just, bilateral deals, but agreements, pardon me, to basically say, hey, look, we need to, work together more. And I think that's the direction we see, like, the Conservatives really confused now in which way to go. But we've had some interesting, changes in the mood music. We've seen Rishi Sunak very much soften the advertorial stance that we saw people like Boris Johnson and Liz Truss employ when trying to take on the European Union. We've seen, or at least heard, of course, the rumors that Sunak wanted to do Swiss-style deals with the EU. We've now also had the, quote, secret, and I say secret in quotation marks because it looks like that, well, 5 minutes after the conference finished, everyone knew about it. So much for being, a secret conference. But even at that, from what we have heard, even Michael Gove, committed Brexiteer that he is, was apparently saying that the UK needed to do bilateral deals with the EU. And here's the thing, the more bilateral deals we do, the easier the Northern Ireland Protocol begins to operate, because now you're not having to do so many as checks, because, hey, the UK is keeping to the same standards as the EU, so no need to check, those goods, because we know those regulations are being enforced. So we are going to see, or at least the EU want to do that. And I was going to go over the article in Conservative Home today, but I can already see I'm at the 5 minute mark. So maybe I've missed my entry point into going into this. But this is what we are seeing now. And when you've got this type of article, as we've laid out to you on Conservative Home, basically saying, hey, look, we should not be this adversarial towards the EU. That in actual fact, a lot softer Brexit was certainly, or at least should have been, the preferred choice of certainly the British governments, because well, he lays out very clearly in the article. He says, it was the ERG that pushed fanatically for the, first of all, Article 50 to be triggered, putting in this 2-year timeline, and constantly just pushing more and more and more. Even now, we see Brexit was never enough. Even now, there is a push that we must go even harder. Hence, the EU retained law bill that Jacob Rees-Mogg introduced, which might very well end up being kicked into the long grass, even though it's in the House of Lords. Now, at the moment, it is very likely this bill will potentially never be passed, because if it is passed, this could very, very easily signal yet another Brexit cliff edge that, well, quite frankly, Rishi Sunak does not seem to want to take. He seems to at least to recognize the need for closer partnerships and closer ties with Europe, which to a lot of people was their desperation to run away from and get away from by being committed Brexiteers for all these years. You want a perfect example? Look at the absolute furore on the right of the severe suggestion that we should have these 15-minute cities. And what essentially they are is, for the first time in decades, the UK is actually thinking about how cities should look and how they should be planned looking ahead, going into the future, of building better, greener cities with less traffic jams, less gridlocks, more public transport. And yet, this has sent the right into an absolute tailspin, saying that, oh no, you don't understand. This is all part of this bizarre net zero plan to build these secretive, almost, again, their words, not mine, but concentration camp style sections in the city, which you are not allowed to leave. You've got to put in your code, to leave this part. But that's not what's in these plans. We actually see many cities, including Sheffield, just down the road from me, is following these plans for a 15-minute city, and a couple of other cities are looking at how they can improve, um, cities. So it's the first time in a long, long time that the UK has actually looked at how it is actually building and planning cities, and dare I say it, for the first time ever, looking ahead at how it can, what these cities should be looking like in about 10, 15 years time, which is not very often what we get in these types of planning applications for cities. It's just, oh, we'll just throw up a block of flats. Well, great, but what about if there are kids in there? Where do they go to school? Where do they people go shopping? Where do they park their cars? There are, again, numerous questions. And don't get me wrong, there are some criticisms against these plans of the 15-minute cities. I understand there are legitimate criticisms against them, but the right, on the other hand, is throwing an absolute hissy fit over them at the moment. So probably expect to see a couple of videos about a 15-minute city and what those actually are in the future. But that is also something why they are against it, because it comes from France. Shock horror. But the fact that we now have these types of articles, and to be honest, the comments down below are very, very sort of much 50-50 split. There are some people outraged that he dare mention that, these softening Brexit or betraying Brexit. And there are, of course, other comments that are like, yes, okay, we should do deals with, the EU. It doesn't make sense to exclude ourselves from, European partnerships. So overall, I think there's going to be a very interesting fight once again in the Tory party over Europe. They cannot escape it. They've had Brexit, they've had these Eurosceptics, but now you've got other Tories that are like, well, actually, we need to be doing deals with Europe because Brexit really hasn't worked out as we had hoped. So the way this goes and the direction this goes is going to be yet another colossal fight, and ultimately a massive part of the Tory civil war that we are seeing brewing on the horizon. And certainly after they lose the next general election, it is going to break loose completely and utterly. And it is going to be a wild ride, that is for sure. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a motivation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.